All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today we're focusing on just one source. It's a transcript from a YouTube sermon,
Hmm.
and it looks really closely at Jesus's final public sermon in Matthew chapter 23, specifically the part titled, well, the sermon itself was called Woe to You.
Right. And our aim here is really to unpack the key warnings, the main insights that particular sermon offered about dangers to faith. We're drawing straight from its take on the text.
Okay, so this sermon, it made a really clear point right at the start. It talked about two kind of forces working against people trying to follow Christ.
Yeah, it set up this contrast.
Right. There are spiritual attacks, the more external pressures. But the sermon argued pretty strongly that spiritual deception might actually be, well, more damaging.
More insidious,
Yeah.
maybe, because it can subtly pull people completely off track, away from the truth, without them even realizing it
Well,
sometimes.
exactly. And the sermon stressed that this deception, it's not always like super obvious. It can come from false teachers, sure, maybe through channels you expect. But the sermon specifically mentioned unexpected places too, like social media, books.
Or even cropping up within churches, within communities you trust. That was a key point.
Definitely. And the core of the sermon was Jesus's woes from that chapter. It explained these weren't just, outbursts of anger.
No, it framed them more as these really profound warnings, like carrying the weight of divine judgment, but also sorrow, a serious call to wake up to the danger.
So where did it start? It jumped right into Jesus's pretty sharp criticisms of the religious leaders, right? The Pharisees and scribes.
Yeah, zeroing in straight away on their hypocrisy. That was the central theme it pulled out.
Okay, so let's unpack that first big warning the sermon highlighted. Jesus says they shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces.
Right. And the sermon really hammered this point.
Yeah.
It wasn't just that they weren't entering the kingdom themselves.
Sure.
It was that they were actively preventing other people who were trying to get in, from doing so.
And the sermon didn't just leave that as, like, ancient history.
No, not at all. It brought it right into the present day. It was challenging, really. It asked listeners to think about how our own actions, an inconsistent life, maybe bad personal choices.
Or even criticizing teachers who are sincere.
Exactly. How those things could inadvertently, slam the door to the kingdom for people looking at us, watching our lives.
Wow, that's quite a challenge. Okay, another thing the sermon really leaned into was the warning about deliberately misleading people, dragging them into false religion.
Yeah, and Jesus's words there, as the sermon pointed out, are incredibly stark, saying that making converts that way could make them twice as much a child of hell.
Twice as much as the person who misled them. That's intense.
It is. And the sermon tied this directly to getting priorities wrong, focusing on the external stuff, the appearance of religion, or maybe minor rules.
Instead of what the sermon called the weightier matters of God's law.
Right. It specifically listed justice, mercy, faithfulness, arguing that focusing on the small stuff while ignoring these big things leads people away from what truly matters.
It makes me think of that image Jesus used, the one the sermon really spent time on, comparing them to whitewashed tombs.
Oh, yeah. Powerful image.
Looking beautiful, clean, religious on the outside.
But inside, as the sermon interpreted it, just full of greed, indulgence, sin, death, and uncleanness, that internal corruption hidden by the shiny exterior.
And this hypocrisy, the sermon argued, was deeply connected to their self-righteousness.
How so?
Well, how they'd build monuments to honor prophets from the past.
Right, showing respect for history.
While at the same time, they were actively rejecting, even plotting against Jesus himself, the living prophet, right in front of them.
Okay, that contradiction. And the sermon noted Jesus's language gets really strong there, calling them serpents, a brood of vipers.
Yeah, hitting hard on that hypocrisy and their resistance to the truth he was bringing.
And according to the sermon's interpretation, this rejection, this turning away from truth and from the Messiah, it wasn't just a passive thing.
No, it had consequences. The sermon argued it actively, like accumulated divine wrath,
Yeah.
that it was building up towards judgment.
And it connected this to history, right? It pointed to the desolation of Jerusalem for that generation.
Exactly. The sermon presented that historical event as kind of the direct result of this rejection, this built-up wrath. Even though Jesus himself expressed this deep desire to protect them, that line about wanting to gather them as a hen gathers her brood.
Such a contrast. The desire to protect versus the consequences of rejection.
So drawing all this together from the source material, this deep dive, what's the main takeaway for you?
What really, really underscores the need for discernment. careful discernment about the teachings and influences you allow into your life.
Being watchful.
Yeah. The sermon was basically pleading, pay attention to what you read, who you listen to, where you're getting your spiritual guidance from.
It felt like a really urgent call from the sermon to guard your soul, specifically from these kinds of deceptions.
Absolutely. And maybe even more than just defense, there was this proactive call too,
Okay.
to actively try, through your own life, your witness, your commitment to those weightier matters, justice, mercy, truth, to actually be someone who opens the doors of the kingdom for others.
Instead of being someone who even accidentally closes them.
Precisely. Be a door opener, not a door closer.
Okay, that's a powerful summary. So maybe here's a final thought to leave you with, drawing from the sermon's perspective. Given these really strong warnings about hypocrisy, about misleading people, and the call to be a door opener, how do the choices you make, like day to day, impact whether you're opening that door or maybe inadvertently closing it for the people around you? Something to reflect on.